Sometimes the monster doesn't break in through the window or smash down the door. Sometimes it's born in your own arms, and admitting that hurts more than any wound on your skin. I raised him, held him close when he had a fever, prayed for him every night, and yet there came a day when I had to run from his hands as if he were a stranger. My name is Noemia Augusta Riley. I'm 72 years old, and I'm the neighborhood seamstress, the one who never turns down a hem job, even when folks say it's not worth fixing. My hands, steady now with a needle, still remember the tremor that once kept me from holding a coffee cup. For decades, I believed silence was the only way to survive, that speaking up was a betrayal of blood, though what happened behind a front door should stay buried there, hidden beneath clean aprons and simmering pots. But there comes a time when the weight of years is heavier than the weight of fear. And so you sit down, shoulders rounded with age, heart patched, together with crooked seams, and realize you can't stay quiet any longer. These days, I live alone in a small apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, filled with plants that somehow bloom even when I forget to water them. I sew for neighbors, their grandkids, anyone who asks. I don't need much, just peace. But that peace doesn't always follow me into the night. Sometimes, memories creep in like a draft under the door, and suddenly I'm 20, 30, 40 again, trapped in a house that no longer felt like mine. I've carried this story like a sin, not for what was done to me, but for everything I allowed in the name of love, duty, and fear. Speaking it out loud isn't easy. Every word costs me something, but I do it because I know there are women listening who might be living the same thing. And if even one of them finds strength in these words, then it will have been worth it. If this part of my story touches you, please subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. It helps me keep sharing stories like this. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. When he was a little boy, he'd fall asleep wrapped around my neck. I thought I was doing it right, that with hard work and love, everything would turn out okay. I never imagined that same boy would one day be the reason I'd run out the door with nothing but a clean dress and a broken soul. I remember my childhood in a small town in rural Kentucky where the houses had white-painted porches and weathered tin roofs that rang in the rain. Our home was modest but warm, a mix of worn clapboard siding and sturdy brick. Out back, the dirt yard glowed gold in the late afternoon sun, and the chickens scratched around while my mother tended them. My father ran a little bicycle repair shop out of the shed by the driveway, his hands always stained with grease, and his face lit with a proud smile. The smell of cornbread baking on Saturdays mingled with the scent of oil and metal, creating a memory I can still summon if I close my eyes. Mornings began early, with the rooster's crow and the rhythmic clink of my father's tools. My mother would wake me with a warm cup of milk, and I'd rush to gather eggs before school. I walked down a gravel path lined with vegetable gardens and neighbors' houses, everyone calling out, "Morning, sugar." My world was small, but it felt wide and safe, like nothing bad could ever cross those rolling green fields. The kitchen table was the heart of our home. That's where bowls of steaming chicken stew were set down, bread still warm from the oven, and where laughter mixed with quiet talks. My mother wasn't one for many words, but she showed her love in the way she filled your plate before you even asked. My father was more talkative, always bringing home stories from his day or tales from when he was young. Between them, they built a home where my brothers and I felt loved and protected. On Sundays, the whole town seemed to gather at the churchyard. After service, the men would talk about work or farming, the women swapped pie recipes, and us kids would chase a beat-up football across the grass. My daddy would sometimes buy me a peppermint stick, and my mama would let me savor it slow while the church bell echoed through the hills. My brothers and I made our own fun with whatever we had. An old jump rope, tin cans for racing, sticks that became swords in our hands. In winter, we'd huddle around the wood stove while Mama crocheted scarves and Daddy told us ghost stories. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside we were safe and warm. Summers belonged to the creek just outside town. The water was cold and clear, sliding over smooth stones, and the grown-ups kept watch from the bank. That's where I learned to swim, with my father's strong hands holding me steady. The sound of rushing water, mixed with our laughter, felt like the purest music. School was small, wooden desks, a chalkboard always dusted white. Our teacher, Mrs. Carter, taught us more than reading and math. She'd say, "A house is just boards and nails, but a home is made of respect." I never forgot that. During the 4th of July fair, Main Street came alive with strings of lights and country music. My mother would sew me a simple but beautiful dress, and I'd spin around feeling like a princess. My father would take my hand and dance with me, laughing as if nothing in the world could ever go wrong. Some evenings, we'd drive out to Grandma's farmhouse, down a lane shaded by old oak trees. She always had a jar of homemade peach preserves waiting for us, and her hug smelled of lavender and wood smoke. It was she who first taught me how to embroider, a skill I never knew would one day feed me. The church bells marked the rhythm of our days. Breakfast, chores, supper, everything was predictable, and in that predictability, there was a deep sense of safety. I truly believed the world was good, that hard work and kindness always paid off. The summer nights stretched long and warm, the winter nights crisp and close. I'd fall asleep to the sound of my brother's laughter drifting through the house and my mother's voice calling us to supper. Back then, home meant refuge. I never imagined it could one day mean fear. Everything changed one crisp October afternoon when fallen leaves covered the yard and the air carried a sharp chill. My father, who had always been steady and strong as the frame of our house, came in from the shop, looking unusually tired. That night, he barely touched his supper and dozed off in his recliner by the wood stove. By morning, we found him there, still and cold, the fire long gone out. There were no goodbyes, no warning, just a silence so heavy it felt like it pressed down on the whole house. I was 12, and it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Mama, a tough woman but used to leaning on him, seemed to shrink in those days after. Neighbors came and went, bringing casseroles and cornbread, offering condolences that couldn't fill the empty chair at our table. Even on sunny days, the house felt dim, and the sound of Daddy's tools in the shed was gone. Every penny started to matter. Every expense another weight on Mama's already burdened shoulders. The bike shop stayed locked up, its once well-worn door now gathering dust. I helped however I could, watching my brothers, sweeping floors, running errands. Mama, looking for a way to keep us afloat, began accepting visits from distant relatives who offered help. Among them was my father's cousin, a man older than Mama, always neatly dressed and speaking in a slow, deep voice, claiming he just wanted to lend a hand so we wouldn't go without. At first, his presence seemed like a blessing. He brought bags of groceries, paid for small repairs around the house, and spoke to Mama in a way that sounded caring and familiar. But behind those gestures, there was something I couldn't name then, a gaze that lingered on me too long. Losing Daddy left more than an emotional hole. It opened the door for new dynamics, awkward silences, and a sense that our home was no longer impenetrable. Mama accepted the cousin's help, maybe because she saw no other choice. My own grief kept me from imagining that this could be the start of something far worse. I remember when his visits grew more frequent, always with some excuse, fixing the porch steps, stacking firewood, checking the roof. Gradually, he stopped feeling like a guest and started acting like he belonged there. I didn't fully understand why, but I began to avoid being alone with him. Back then, I still believed the worst pain I'd ever feel was losing my father. I didn't know yet that the deepest wound wouldn't come from death, but from betrayal, one that would grow inside the very walls that had once been my refuge. At first, his presence wore the mask of kindness. He'd show up with a careful smile, carrying grocery bags or a box of fresh apples from the farmer's market. He'd ask after my brothers and slip them pieces of candy. For Mama, He'd bring flowers wrapped in the sports section of the local paper, as if he could brighten the grief that had settled over our home. But behind every kind gesture, I sensed a shadow only I seemed to notice. His eyes lingered on me too long, and his voice dropped low when he spoke to me, like he was tucking his words away where no one else could hear. As the days passed, he found more reasons to stay. He'd check the pantry, help with the bills, sit in the quiet of Daddy's empty shop smoking cigarettes, studying the house like a man learning the map of a place he planned to claim. I learned to recognize the sound of his boots on the floorboards, and to avoid it. Mama, worn down and grateful for the help, didn't see, or didn't want to see, how uncomfortable I had become. One afternoon, while Mama was out buying flour, he appeared unannounced, said he was just dropping off some tools, but stayed in the kitchen making small talk while his eyes stayed fixed on me. He asked for a glass of water, and when I handed it to him, his fingers brushed mine. Slow, deliberate. I pretended not to notice, but that night I prayed it had been an accident. It wasn't. Soon he was inventing chores that needed my help, holding a ladder, finding something in the shed, walking with him to the cellar. Every time he found a way to stand too close, the smell of tobacco and sweat clung to me after, like a mark I couldn't wash away. I started wearing baggy clothes, hiding behind shapeless sweaters and dull colors, even in the summer heat. The comments came next, dressed as compliments. "You're not a little girl anymore," he'd say with a crooked smile that made my stomach tighten. In public, he played the part of the caring family member. In private, his tone carried a weight that pressed me down, and I knew, even then, that no one would believe me if I spoke up. My brothers adored him. He played games with them, taught them tricks with his pocket knife, told them stories from his younger days. I didn't have the heart to shatter their innocence, but inside, the fear grew sharper. Before long, he began laying down rules. He said it was to keep things in order now that Daddy was gone. No going out after dark, no talking to certain boys. He pretended it was for my safety, but his tone carried ownership. I felt watched, even when he wasn't there. I'll never forget a rainy afternoon. I was folding laundry in my bedroom when he opened the door without knocking. Leaning on the frame, he just stared. After what felt like hours, he smirked and walked away. That night I slept with a chair wedged against my door. Each day brought a new way for him to remind me he could invade my life whenever he chose. Sometimes it was a comment, sometimes an accidental touch on my shoulder. Mama never suspected a thing. He knew exactly how to play her. Every favor became an unspoken debt. When we were alone, his voice would harden. "Your mama wouldn't understand," he'd say. "No need to make her upset." That sentence became both a warning and a lock on my mouth. I began measuring my words, my steps, even my expressions. At family gatherings, he was the perfect gentleman, and I was the quiet girl who smiled for the camera, while silently counting the minutes until he left. The cruelest part was knowing no one would believe me. In our town, his reputation was spotless, hard-working, generous, loyal to family. And so, without shouts or visible bruises, he took over. My house, my routines, my safety, and I, trapped between the urge to run and the need to protect Mama and my brothers, learned to stay silent, not realizing that silence would become my prison for years. The days turned into a rehearsed routine, every movement calculated to avoid a brush of contact, a lingering glance, any excuse for him to get too close. I woke before sunrise, made breakfast for my brothers, and had the house spotless before Mama even got up. It wasn't just to help her. Any sign of disorder could become his excuse to set things right. Silence became my constant companion, a thin shield that barely protected me. I learned to read the sound of his footsteps. The quick, light ones meant he was in a good mood. The slow, heavy ones meant he'd been drinking. My body reacted like a cornered animal to each creak of the floorboards. Some nights I stayed awake, muscles tense, running through escape routes I never actually took. Sleep stopped being rest and became a dangerous surrender. My brothers, too young to understand, asked why I didn't play with them like before. I'd smile and make excuses, a headache, schoolwork, being tired. In truth, I was afraid they'd see the fear in my eyes. Protecting them meant keeping even the truth away from them. Clothes became my armor. I abandoned the light dresses Mama sewed for me and replaced them with baggy jeans, loose sweatshirts, dull colors. Even in July heat, I stayed covered. Still, his eyes seemed to find ways to slip through. The marks he left weren't always visible. Not just the shoulder that ached from a too firm grip. The bruise I blamed on bumping into the counter, or the stiff neck from sleeping in a defensive curl. But the deeper wounds that didn't bleed. No one asked too many questions, and I made sure to give quick answers. The kitchen was my partial refuge. The smell of simmering chili, the clink of a spoon against a pot, gave me a fragile sense of normal. But even there he'd appear, always with a reason to stand too close. I learned to keep something, a table, a chair, between us. Fear reshaped my body language. I hugged the walls when I walked, avoided his gaze, and spoke in clipped sentences. The easy laughter I once had was locked away somewhere I couldn't reach. I began hiding in places he didn't usually go. The chicken coop, the dusty attic, even under the big workbench in Stay, Daddy's shed. Sometimes I'd take a book and pretend to read, though the words slipped past me. Mama, tired and grateful for his help, didn't see the weight pressing down on me. I avoided anything that might make her suspicious, worried that if she found out, she wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that he'd convince her I was lying. At school, my grades slipped. Sleepless nights left my eyes puffy. Friends asked if I was sick, and I'd just say, family stuff, before changing the subject. Time stopped being measured in hours and started being counted in his visits. Every time he left, I breathed like someone breaking the surface after being underwater too long. And every time he came back, the drowning feeling returned. Even the county fair, once my favorite event, became another minefield. He was always nearby, keeping watch even when I stood in a crowd. I started believing I had no right to ask for help. He'd remind me, without me, things would be worse. And Mama defended him at every turn. That false loyalty kept me trapped. The house itself felt complicit. The creak of the floor announcing his approach, the poorly latched doors letting in his shadow, the mirrors reflecting a girl with rounded shoulders and a dimmed gaze. There were days I thought about running, but where would I go? I had no money, no close relatives, and leaving Mama and my brothers felt impossible. So every morning became another silent act of survival. Get up, pretend everything was fine, and hope. The night passed without him finding a new way to remind me who was in control. My body became a locked house, windows boarded up, light slipping in only through a crack. In that invisible prison I survived, though with each passing day, a little more of me faded. I'm not sure exactly when it began, but one day I realized I was watching him more than he was watching me, not out of fear, but to learn his routines, his weak spots, the moments when he let his guard down. It was like a tiny spark of defiance lit inside me, small but strong enough to give me a new way to face each day. If he wanted to control everything, I'd start predicting his moves. My first tactic was staying longer at school. I'd say I was helping the teacher or working on extra assignments. Mrs. Carter, with her sharp, knowing eyes, noticed the change. The baggier clothes, the doodles of locks and keys in my notebooks. She never asked outright, but the way she looked at me told me she saw more than I was saying. I started finding excuses to walk to the general store or stop by a neighbor's house, picking up sugar, borrowing a pan, returning a jar. Any minute away from home was a breath of clean air. Sometimes I'd run into Rosa, the widow who had moved into town not long ago. She had a warm laugh and eyes that seemed to read secrets. One day she spotted a scratch on my arm. "Cat gotcha?" she asked gently. I nodded. She didn't press, but she poured me a glass of sweet tea before sending me home. That simple act carried me through more days than she knew. Inside the house, My resistance was subtle. I began locking my bedroom door whenever I could, or wedging a chair under the knob. I'd place small objects near the frame so they'd fall if someone tried to come in. It wasn't much, but it gave me a few seconds of warning. My responses to his comments changed too. Before, I'd stay silent or fake a smile. Now I'd deflect, pretend I hadn't heard, or just walk away without explanation. It seemed to irritate him, but also threw him off balance. The harder it was for him to get a reaction, the more I focused on keeping that wall in place. With my brothers, I began slipping in small instructions they didn't fully understand. Keep the door latched. Don't leave the window open at night. Come to my room if they heard strange footsteps. I didn't tell them the truth, but I wanted them ready for something they couldn't yet imagine. One afternoon, in the town square, Rosa called me over to help her carry some grocery bags. I stayed longer than I needed, talking about recipes and fabrics. Before I left, she said quietly, "My door's always open to you." That thought, having somewhere I could run, planted itself in my mind like the first seed of escape. By watching him, I learned his patterns. The nights he drank, the mornings he left for the market, the hours he napped. I began to use that knowledge, avoiding him and also setting aside little things I might need if I ran. A few coins, a handkerchief, a notebook where I wrote down everything I felt. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe not all was lost. It was a quiet resistance, almost invisible, but each small act reminded me I still had a voice, even if I wasn't ready to shout. And that voice, though faint, was growing stronger. It all came to a head one humid July night, when the heat kept the windows open but the air refused to move. My brothers were asleep and Mama had gone to check on a sick neighbor. I was alone in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for the next day's dinner, when I heard his slow, heavy boots on the porch. Even before I saw him, my skin prickled. He stepped into the doorway with a half-empty bottle in his hand and a twisted smile that made my stomach knot. He leaned against the counter, too close, talking in that low tone I'd come to dread. His hand brushed my arm, and I stepped back. That small reaction, the fear he could see on my face, seemed to please him. But this time, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was anger, raw and burning, and the cold certainty that if I didn't act now, I might never get another chance. I met his gaze, and for the first time, didn't look away. My voice was steady when I told him to get out of the kitchen. He laughed, took a step toward me, and my hand found the paring knife on the counter. I didn't raise it, but I held it firm, point down, making it clear I wasn't moving. His expression flickered, though he tried to hide it with another short laugh. "Put that down," he muttered, but there was no confidence in his voice now. The next moments are a blur. My breathing was so loud it drowned everything else out. He stepped back, then again, before finally turning and walking out, muttering something I couldn't make out. I stayed there, gripping the knife until my knuckles hurt, shaking all over, but feeling a strange rush of relief mixed with terror. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat against my bedroom door, knees pulled up, listening for any sound. I knew with certainty that staying here meant he'd cross lines I couldn't allow, and I wasn't going to give him the chance. At dawn, I left the house with a small bag hidden under my sweater. Inside were a few coins, the handkerchief Rosa had given me, and the notebook where I'd written everything I'd lived through. I walked to the town square, heart pounding, and went straight to her house. When she opened the door, I was already crying. Rosa didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "You can stay here as long as you need." In that embrace, I knew I'd stepped through a door I could never go back through. For the first time in years, the cage was open, even if I didn't yet know what life outside it would look like. The first days at Rosa's were a blur of exhaustion and relief. I slept more than I had in years, my body reclaiming the rest stolen by constant vigilance. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard his footsteps, only to find it was the creak of the old floorboards or the gentle hum of Rosa's fan. Slowly, the fear began to loosen its grip, leaving behind a deep tiredness and a fragile sense of safety. Mama came to see me on the third day. She cried when she saw how thin I'd gotten, the lines of weariness etched into my face. She didn't ask much. Maybe she understood more than she let on. I asked her to look after my brothers and to make sure he never set foot in our house again. I don't know if she promised something she could truly keep, but she didn't ask me to come home. And in her silence, I took that as her blessing. The town, as towns do, talked. Some made up stories, others asked too many questions, and plenty pretended not to know a thing. But I no longer cared. I'd learned that not every battle is won by explaining. Some are won simply by surviving and getting away. And I had won the most important one. I was still alive. If this part of my story touched you, please like this video so more people can find the courage to take that first step. Your support helps keep these truths from being buried behind closed doors. Today, when I sit at the small sewing table Rosa gave me, and the sunlight spills across the fabric, my hands no longer shake from fear, but from the quiet thrill of still being here. Surviving didn't give me back the life that was taken from me, but it gave me another one where I can speak, choose, and most of all breathe. And after everything, that is more than enough.